I had been driving for what seemed like an eternity, at least 2 hours, to the Marriott in Baltimore. My wife, Claire, was attending a conference there, and I wanted to surprise her with dinner. However, there was a more pressing reason for my trip. For the past few months, I had been suspicious that Claire was seeing someone else. Every time she went on a work trip or training session, she would come back later than expected. That night, I was determined to confront her about it, if necessary, and put an end to my doubts. We had been married for 14 years and had 2 wonderful children, Sarah, 12, and Jake, 10, who were staying with my mother that night. Claire and I had met in high school and dated for a few years before getting married. She was always bright, cheerful, with long brown hair and a figure that turned heads, but something had changed a few months before. She was sitting on the bed reading a book when I walked in. I was relieved and let out a sigh of relief, glad I hadn't caused a scene. She was seated at her desk with her briefcase open, working on some paperwork. She turned around, surprised to see me. I quickly explained that I had free time and wanted to take her out to dinner. Her expression showed genuine delight, suggesting I could stay for the night and she was looking forward to my company. She approached me and gave me a big kiss, and I realized my plan had backfired. When I suggested spending time before dinner, she suggested a quick intimate moment before heading to the shower, promising a full night after. I felt relieved, thinking maybe I had overreacted. We shared a brief and passionate moment, after which Claire went to take a shower in the bathroom. Sitting on the bed, I took a deep breath and tried to shake off my doubts. My gaze fixed on Claire's cosmetics bag on the dresser, where I had come looking for some aspirin for my headache from the long drive. However, instead of the pills, I found something that made my heart sink: a pack of condoms. Claire had switched to oral contraceptives after Jake was born, but they made her feel sick. After that, I decided to have a vasectomy, and we hadn't used any form of contraception since then. So why were there condoms in her bag? The realization hit me hard: Claire was cheating on me. There was no other explanation for it. What should I do? I couldn't let this go unaddressed. My thoughts raced through a multitude of possibilities, and then I did something that I am not proud of. I searched through Claire's bag and found a safety pin, which she always keeps on hand for unexpected wardrobe malfunctions. With precision, I used the pin to puncture the center of each condom and return them to their original position. As Claire finished her shower, I grabbed my phone and called my friend Rob. He's the kind of friend who would do anything without hesitation for a friend. I asked him for a small favor, just a phone call. I explained that I needed his help pretending there was an emergency at my house. I said something about a burst pipe that required my immediate attention, and Rob agreed without hesitation, promising to call around 7. I no longer wanted to spend the night with Claire after what I found. The idea of being intimate with Claire made me feel uncomfortable, so I decided to use Rob's phone call as an excuse to leave and think about my feelings during the drive home. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, it was difficult for me to look at her. Every part of me wanted to confront her and demand answers, but I held back, knowing that losing control would not help. I needed to stay calm and figure out what to do next. We went down to the dining room of the hotel, and I tried to act normally, but inside I was falling apart. Claire seemed unaware of my internal struggle as we sat at the table. I asked her to order what she wanted, but she shrugged and said she wasn't hungry. She ordered a small filet mignon and a bottle of wine to go with it. After we placed our orders, I couldn't help but test the waters. I asked if she was happy in our marriage. Without hesitation, she replied that she was. She went on about how we have a lovely home, 2 wonderful children, and a husband who adores her. She said that she couldn't ask for more, and I nodded in agreement. However, her words felt like a blow to my heart. How could she be so happy when she is secretly seeing someone behind my back? I admitted that sometimes I question whether I am doing enough to make her happy. But I always try to emphasize how grateful I am to have her in my life. I even joke that sometimes I have to pinch myself to make sure it's real. Claire calls me silly and says that's why I came all the way to see her. She assures me that I have nothing to worry about, as she is content. Our dinner arrived and we talked throughout the meal. But my mind was elsewhere, thinking about what I discovered. Just as the plates were cleared, my phone rang. It was Rob calling on schedule. I excused myself from the table to take a call, waiting a few minutes before returning. When I arrived back, I informed Claire that Rob had phoned to tell me about a broken pipe at the school and I needed to return urgently. Her expression darkened, but I couldn't tell if she was genuinely disappointed or just annoyed by the interruption. In any case, my decision to leave or stay wouldn't significantly affect her; she would face the consequences anyway. We approached the elevator and a man I didn't recognize greeted Claire, introducing himself as Tom Bradley. He said he had stopped by her room earlier, but no one answered. I was furious. He extended his hand to me and said, "Claire speaks of you often." I replied, "I'm Tom." I forced a smile and shook his hand even though it was difficult to pretend to be friendly. As we rode in the elevator, I felt a knot in my stomach tightening. Was this the man? Was this the man she was seeing behind my back? When we got back to the room, I told Claire bluntly that I wanted her to quit her job. I could not tolerate her working with him any longer. We had discussed this before, but now I needed her to understand that it was non-negotiable. Claire retorted that she wouldn't quit and that I should get over my paranoia about them. She made it seem like I was the problem, not them. After a cold kiss, I packed my things and left the hotel. My mind was in turmoil with anger and betrayal. The whole way home, I couldn't shake the image of him visiting her room. By the time I arrived at the house, I was in a state of emotional turmoil. I was furious, feeling a deep sense of betrayal and anger towards my wife for what she had done, and also feeling angry with myself for not being able to do anything about the situation. My thoughts were consumed with thoughts of divorce, but without any concrete evidence, I felt powerless. Claire, my wife, was unfaithful, I knew that, but I felt trapped, unable to act. 2 days later, she returned home from her conference, acting as if nothing had happened. She was cheerful, even slightly annoyingly so, which only served to intensify my anger. I knew I had to do something, but while she was busy unpacking her bags, I couldn't resist checking her bag again. There it was, another condom with the small hole I had made in it. How many had she used in those few days alone? The thought made me feel sick. That weekend, the company where Claire worked, Liberty Insurance, was hosting a picnic for their employees and their families. The children were excited, but I wasn't looking forward to it at all. I had a suspicion that some of my colleagues were aware of my affair, and the thought made me feel uneasy. Perhaps I was overthinking things, but given the circumstances, it was hard not to be suspicious. Claire seemed to be having a great time, engaging in lively conversations with her colleagues, including Tom. Their interactions were not overly affectionate, but there seemed to be a sense of closeness between them that was difficult to ignore. It was as if they were in their own world when they were together. I tried to stay out of the way, not wanting to draw attention to myself, but a woman I hadn't met before, Janet Bradley, approached me and introduced herself as Tom's wife. She was breathtaking, with her long, flowing hair and large, blue eyes. She was a woman who seemed to have stepped out of a fashion magazine. For a moment, I was truly surprised. How could Tom betray someone like her? I always held Claire in high esteem, even loved her, but this Janet was a different matter. We exchanged greetings, and after a short conversation, we decided to find a more private place to talk. We ended up on some benches by the lake, away from the picnic area, so we could talk in peace. As we sat, I could see that Janet had something important to say. She seemed hesitant, clearly struggling to start the conversation. I decided to help her out. I told her that I had recently found out about their affair that week. Her relief was immediate. She confessed that she had known for about 2 months and had already decided to divorce. She even hired a private detective to gather evidence. Janet explained that her lawyer had advised her to seek Claire's testimony or at least obtain a notarized statement regarding the affair in order to strengthen her case. I inquired about the evidence she had, and she mentioned photographs and recorded phone conversations, though no videos as of yet. She believed the evidence she possessed was sufficient to establish a strong case. Then she asked if I was willing to utilize some of the same evidence in my own divorce proceedings. She also mentioned that she intended to file a lawsuit against Liberty Insurance for negligence, as she had statements from other employees aware of the situation who did nothing to stop it. Janet was determined to hold both Tom and Claire responsible one way or another. She suggested we collaborate by sharing the evidence we possessed, and I agreed, as it made sense to work together. Before returning to the picnic, Janet invited me over to her house the next day. Tom was planning to play golf in the morning and thought it would be a good opportunity to visit her. She explained that she was working on a project for a client and the room was a mock-up of a hotel room. I asked her more about the project, as I was interested in it. She told me that the client was a hotel chain and she was designing the layout and furnishings for their new hotels. I was impressed with her work and asked about how long she had been working on it. She said she had been working for a few weeks, but it was still in the early stages of the project. I offered to help and she gratefully accepted. We spent the afternoon working together and had a great time. By the end of the day, I had learned a lot and was even more impressed with her skills. When Claire returned, I told her all about my day and what we had accomplished. She was impressed with my work and said that she was proud of me. We had a great day together, and I felt happy to have assisted Janet with her project. I had informed you that we would be watching Tom's golf performance in real time and with vivid detail. She hinted that I might recognize the person he was with. When I asked about the arrangement, she mentioned that it had cost her approximately $1,400, but she believed that Tom would eventually cover the expenses. The session was scheduled for a couple of hours, so she suggested that I make myself comfortable. She had even prepared some snacks and promised to give me a DVD of the event afterward. She admitted that although she didn't particularly want to witness what was going to happen, she didn't want to miss out on it either. We talked for about 20 minutes, during which she shared more details about the situation, showing me photos, playing recordings, and explaining documents. The more she explained, the more aware I became of Claire and Tom's involvement. It was heartbreaking, but it also provided me with the evidence I needed. Then, as Janet predicted, the video began to play. There were Tom and Claire entering the motel room. They wasted no time undressing and engaging in intimate activities without any small talk or foreplay. Although the video was clear, the sound was slightly distorted. I couldn't believe my eyes. My wife was with another man on that video. Watching them like that was the most uncomfortable experience of my life. Trying to lighten the mood, Janet commented on Claire's figure, saying that it wasn't often seen. I forced a smile, but honestly, I didn't know how to respond. It felt surreal and I couldn't watch any longer. After a few minutes, it became too much for me. I turned to Janet and said that I didn't need to watch the rest. She agreed, admitting that it was painful to watch. We decided to stop the video knowing that the lawyers already had enough evidence. I confessed to Janet that seeing my wife in that situation, especially with her so close to me, made me feel uncomfortable. The whole scene seemed wrong. Janet understood my feelings and suggested an alternative activity. I was relieved when she proposed showing me her koi pond in the backyard. This idea was much more interesting than watching the video for another minute. When I expressed interest in her hobby, her eyes sparkled with excitement. She seemed genuinely happy to share her passion with me. As we walked outside, I realized how much better my afternoon was compared to Claire's. The koi pond was truly impressive. Janet had 3 of them and each one was more beautiful than the last. She explained the pumping and filtering systems, which fascinated me given my background in plumbing. I offered to help her whenever she needed it, simply out of a desire to learn more about koi ponds. Spending time with Janet was a pleasant surprise, but it was not a romantic encounter, at least not yet. We spent several hours together, the time flying by as we talked about everything except our cheating partners. It was a welcome respite. Upon our return to the motel, we found the room empty on the screen, indicating that Tom and Claire had departed. Now it was my turn to head home. Janet accompanied me to the door, promising to call when Tom's next golf game was scheduled, suggesting that I should bring Sarah and Jake along to see the koi pond. This was a pleasant thought, an optimistic prospect amidst the turmoil. During the drive home, a mixture of emotions overwhelmed me: relief, anger, and a sliver of hope that, perhaps, just maybe, I could overcome this situation. Over the following weeks, things were challenging. Each time Claire took a shower, I would check her bag, only to find a fresh supply of condoms. I couldn't imagine how she found time to use all of them. It was as if she led a secret life that I was unaware of. I kept a safety pin on my keychain ready to pierce the next stash I discovered. In the meantime, on days when Tom played golf, I took the children to see Janet. They loved visiting the koi pond, affectionately calling it their favorite place. Upon returning home, they proudly showed Claire their drawings of the fish. However, she remained oblivious to Janet being Tom's wife, which was almost comical. Claire seemed grateful for my help keeping the children occupied when she was busy. I tried to discuss the possibility of her leaving Tom, but every time I received a cold rejection. The second time was especially harsh, with her derogatory remarks about my masculinity. This made it easier to justify my decision. I began avoiding physical intimacy, and the less time we spent together, the further apart we fell. Then, one night, Claire dropped a surprise. She informed me that she had recently been feeling stressed and thought it might be a good idea for her to take some time off work in order to visit her sister Nancy for a few days or even a week. She explained that her work had been particularly demanding with long hours and late nights and believed that it would benefit her to take a break. She presented it as a favor and suggested that I take some time off as well. That night, I had difficulty sleeping, my mind racing with thoughts of the tasks that still needed to be done. Finally, the time came, and I had to make a decision. The next day, after Claire left for her rest and recovery, I began preparing for the change. I had to tell my parents about the situation and admit that I had not performed as well as a husband should. They were incredibly supportive and offered their assistance in any way possible. The children were excited to spend time with their grandparents, and my father's vehicle would be helpful for transporting Claire's things out of the home. On Thursday morning, I began a 3-hour drive to the first hospital where I thought Claire might visit. However, upon arrival, I found myself in a difficult situation. That left me with only one choice: the family planning center. I walked into the building, trying to appear as confident as I could, and told the receptionist I was Adam Taylor and my wife Claire had sent me there to complete some paperwork. I pretended not to know the exact name of the form, but said it was about understanding the process and agreeing not to take legal action. The receptionist checked her records and confirmed Claire was registered. She explained Claire's sister had already completed the paperwork, but my signature was preferred. She handed me the form and I quickly signed it, placing my signature directly below Nancy's. The procedure was scheduled for Friday morning at 11 a.m., so we were instructed to arrive 1 hour in advance. I inquired about any outstanding payments, but the receptionist assured me that Claire had already paid the full amount of $800 in cash. I expressed my gratitude and left the clinic feeling a mix of relief and concern. All the preparations were now in place. The reception I received at Nancy and Brad's house was predictably uncomfortable. Claire seemed genuinely surprised to see me and asked about my visit. I explained that my parents offered to take care of the children for a few days and that I took some time off work to visit them. I mentioned that I wanted to unwind like she did. There was a brief silence and I could see the wheels turning in their heads. I had caught them by surprise and they were trying to figure out how to react. Nancy nodded to Brad and he went into the kitchen with her. Claire tried to keep the conversation light, but I sensed her unease. When Brad returned, he suggested that we go on a boat ride with his friend Jack the next day as a way to break up our daily routine. I agreed, finding the idea appealing, although I had no intention of actually participating. The next morning, when I informed Brad that I was not planning to join them, Jack was already at the dock with the boat ready. While Brad packed a picnic and filled the cooler with drinks, I stayed by his truck. When he asked if I wanted to come along, I explained that I had changed my mind and preferred to spend the day on my own. He tried to convince me to reconsider, using mild profanity and half-hearted threats, but after a few minutes he realized that I was serious. We exchanged a few more words before he finally accepted my decision. Finally, he gave up and left without me. Once they were out of sight, I returned home, prepared a cup of coffee, and silenced Claire's phone. I called my father, who was an early riser, and we talked for 2 hours, ignoring the persistent phone calls. I assumed Brad was trying to contact Nancy to warn her, but I was determined to prevent that. Eventually, Claire and Nancy woke up and I said goodbye to my father, ready for the confrontation ahead. When Nancy's phone rang, they only had a few minutes before they had to be at the family planning center. I finished the pot of coffee and made another one for them, knowing I would face a backlash soon. Claire looked at me, clearly unhappy, and asked why I was still there. I replied that I wasn't in the mood to go fishing and decided to spend the day with them. I suggested we find a nice place for lunch as I had to leave that evening anyway. Claire swiftly rejected my proposal, explaining that she and Nancy had plans and did not want my company. She emphasized that they only see each other a few times a year and I had the whole week to spend with them. I was not willing to accept this, so I pushed back, arguing that since I drove all this way, the least they could do was spend half a day with me. Nancy, clearly annoyed, left the room to make a phone call. Claire sat there, looking dejected, as if she had just been hit by a truck. We could hear Nancy yelling at Brad on the phone, like he had done something unforgivable by leaving me behind. Claire tried one last time to convince me not to come, saying their plans didn't involve me and I would just be in the way. I calmly insisted I wanted to know their plans so I could decide if I wanted to join them or do something else. I even joked about them meeting up with male friends, but she quickly denied it. Claire explained that they were planning to shop for personal items such as bras, underwear, and nightgowns and didn't want anyone else, especially men, to be around while they tried them on. I shrugged and suggested that most of the stores they were interested in were located in the mall, so I could find something else to do while they were trying on the clothes. I even offered to take them to a nice restaurant for lunch to make up for any inconvenience. Nancy reappeared in the doorway, staring at me without saying a word. Claire could see that she wasn't going to win the argument, so she eventually gave in, admitting that she needed to get dressed. A short while later, they both came downstairs, clearly annoyed but resigned to the fact that I was going with them. I suspected that Nancy's phone call was likely to be to the family planning clinic, perhaps to reschedule an appointment, since I had mentioned leaving that evening. They probably thought they could wake me up and leave after I left. I insisted on driving my own car, making it clear that I wasn't about to be left somewhere. We stopped at a gas station and I spent some time filling up the tank, checking the oil and water levels, and wiping the windshield clean. It was probably the longest time I had ever spent on routine car maintenance, and we just sat there waiting. When we finally arrived at the shopping center, I parked the car in a distant spot so we would need to walk a bit to get to the entrance. Once inside, I let them go ahead, keeping my distance but making sure they knew I was there. They didn't seem to be enjoying themselves at all. Most of their time was spent whispering to each other and exchanging annoyed glances. They bought a few items, but it was clear they were only going through the motions. I kept an eye on them, but I wasn't particularly interested in what they were buying. The important thing was that I had delayed the inevitable appointment. The time for the appointment passed, and Claire would need to reschedule. I had no intention of stopping her from going through with her decision, but making things more difficult for her was my way of trying to regain some control. At noon, we met in the middle of the mall as planned. We have lunch at Olive Garden and then returned home around 2 p.m. The ride back was quiet with little conversation, and I could feel their anger. But I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. When we arrived home, I grabbed a beer and sat on the couch feeling satisfied. A few hours later, Brad came back, only to be confronted by Nancy for about 30 minutes. After that, he disappeared until dinner time. Later that evening, when the dishes were done, I invited Claire to have a private talk in the kitchen. Nancy gave me a sharp look but said nothing, and the two of them went to the living room. Claire was still upset after the events of the day, and I could see she was not in a good mood. I knew it would be difficult to deal with her, but I was prepared. I decided to get straight to the point and repeated my request for Claire to resign from her job and end her relationship with Tom. When I said this, her jaw tightened and she looked as if she was about to snap. She seemed to be barely restraining herself from hitting me. Despite my persistence, she insisted that she was done with my questions and demanded that I stop bringing them up. Claire was fed up and said that she already knew my requests would not change anything. In a fit of anger, she issued an ultimatum: either we change the subject or I should leave. However, I refused to back down, and instead, I reached for an envelope I had brought with me. Inside, there were divorce papers. I explained that I had asked Claire at least 10 times in the past 2 months to leave her job and break up with Tom, but each time she refused. I suggested that she should sign the papers and send them in by mail. To make it easier for her, I even included a self-addressed, stamped envelope. While I did suggest that she could seek the advice of a legal professional if necessary, I was not willing to wait any longer for her to make a decision. I even suggested taking them out for a nice lunch to make up for any inconvenience caused. After a few moments, Nancy reappeared in the doorway, staring at me in silence. Seeing that she wasn't going to win the argument, Claire eventually gave in and admitted that she needed to get ready. Shortly after, they both descended the stairs, clearly annoyed, but resigned to my presence. My suspicion was that Nancy's call was likely related to the family planning appointment, perhaps a rescheduling, given that I had mentioned my departure that evening. Perhaps they thought they could leave after I departed. However, I insisted on driving, making it clear I wouldn't be left behind. At a gas station, we paused while I filled up the tank and checked the oil and fluids, as well as cleaned the windshield. This was the longest car maintenance session I'd ever experienced, and we simply waited. When we finally arrived at the shopping mall, I parked the car in a distant spot so we would need to walk a little to get to the entrance. Once we were inside, I allowed them to go ahead, keeping a distance but making sure they knew I was there. It was clear they weren't enjoying themselves at all. Most of their time was spent whispering to each other and exchanging unhappy glances. They bought a few items, but it seemed like they were just going through the motions. I watched them, but I wasn't really interested in what they were purchasing. The most important thing was that I had postponed the inevitable appointment. Claire's appointment time had passed and she would need to reschedule. I didn't want to stop her from going through with her decision, but by making things more difficult for her, I was trying to regain some control over the situation. At noon, we met as planned in the center of the mall. We had lunch at Olive Garden and then returned home around 2 p.m. On the way back, there was little conversation and I could sense their anger, but I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. When we got home, I grabbed a beer and sat on the couch feeling satisfied. A few hours later, Brad returned and was confronted by Nancy for about 30 minutes. After that, he disappeared until dinner time. That evening, after the dishes were done, I had a private conversation with Claire in the kitchen. Nancy gave me a sharp look but said nothing, and they both went to the living room. Claire was still upset about the events of the day and was not in a good mood, but I knew she would be difficult to deal with. I decided to be direct and repeated my request that Claire resign from her job and end her relationship with Tom. When I said these words, her jaw tightened and she looked like she was about to explode. She seemed to be barely holding back from hitting me. Despite my persistence, she declared that she had had enough of my questions and demanded that I stop bringing them up. Claire seemed exasperated and said that she knew my requests wouldn't change anything. In a fit of anger, she issued an ultimatum: we either changed the subject or she would leave. Instead of backing down, however, I reached for an envelope that I had brought with me. Inside were divorce papers. I explained that I had asked Claire at least 10 times over the past 2 months to quit her job and break up with Tom, but she always refused. I offered to have her sign the papers and mail them. To make it easier, I even provided a self-addressed, stamped envelope. I suggested that she consult with a legal expert if necessary, but I wasn't prepared to wait any longer for her decision. Brad looked down at his feet, struggling with the truth. After a moment, he apologized and offered to help with the unloading. We finished in about 10 minutes while Claire continued to cry in the kitchen. I didn't know why she was upset, but I didn't care. It seemed like it was too late for us to fix things. The next week, both Claire and Tom were let go from Liberty Insurance. Claire refused to sign the document Janet's lawyer requested, but my lawyer said we had enough evidence without it. I didn't hear from Claire after that, not even a word. She didn't come to see our kids, but they seemed to be okay without her. They were bonding with Janet and spending a lot of time as a family. There was no talk of a romantic relationship between Janet and I, at least not then. We were both focused on our divorces and our children. Over the next few months, I learned a lot about Coy and enjoyed every minute of our time together. Finally, after a long 4-month period, both divorces were finalized. Claire did not fight her divorce, while Tom fought his tooth and nail. He lost everything: the house, investments, and ended up paying substantial monthly alimony to Janet. A few days before Christmas, Claire showed up at the house with gifts for the children. I decided to be civil and not disrupt the festive spirit. She stayed for about 2 hours, playing the role of a loving mother, then left as quietly as she arrived. We did not discuss the divorce or affair. It was as if those events never happened. After she left, I felt a sense of closure. The house was put on the market, and 2 months later, I moved in with Janet. Tom took a job in Omaha and Claire followed him. Months later, Tom disappeared without even telling Claire where he was. She eventually returned to live with Nancy, who was also going through a divorce after Brad took a job on an Alaskan pipeline. Brad sent the divorce papers to Nancy by mail, and the sisters became each other's source of support as they had both been abandoned by the men they tried to build their lives with. Meanwhile, things were going well for me and Janet. We felt comfortable with each other, and she loved my children, who returned her affection. We spent as much time together as possible, and by June we were planning our wedding. We had overcome the pain of our previous relationships and were looking forward to a new start. Cliff finally settled into a peaceful and contented life. As for the man who Claire had left me for, his circumstances were not so fortunate. A few weeks after his disappearance, it was reported that he had been attacked outside his favorite bar. The assailant severely beat him, resulting in 5 broken ribs, shattered kneecaps, and numerous missing teeth. He also lost his wallet and one of his testicles during the attack. It seemed like karma had finally caught up with him, and his days of unrestrained deception were over. Janet and I continued to grow closer, not only as colleagues but also as a family. The children and I learned about koi and spent many happy afternoons in the backyard observing the fish and enjoying the tranquil life we had created together. After all that had happened, we felt like we had finally gotten the life we deserved. No more drama or deception, just the simple joy of being together. One day, Janet surprised me with the news that she had purchased a beautiful 6-bedroom villa nearby using the money she had saved from selling her business. The villa had a large pool which we could use to spend hot summer days in. In the garage, Janet had also kept my old Jaguar XK140, which had been sitting there waiting for us to take it for a ride along the coast soon. We planned to drive to a well-known French restaurant where the 3 of us, me, Janet, and the car, could enjoy a delicious meal and celebrate. Regarding Claire, I heard that she was still staying with Nancy, trying to rebuild her life after Tom's betrayal, but that was her choice. I had moved on and was ready to start a new chapter with Janet at my side. We both looked forward to the future with excitement. I want to thank you for your incredible support and for watching my YouTube videos. Your enthusiasm and feedback mean a lot to me. I appreciate your time and effort. Looking forward to more exciting content in the future. Best wishes.